Hi, everyone. So, what's escalating around you requires your immediate protective awareness. Subscribe now because this intensity is crossing lines. There's someone whose focus on you has moved beyond normal interest into territory that should alarm you. And the fact that you've already sensed their obsession, already recognized their excessive attention, already noticed the intensity that exceeds what friendship or casual attraction typically looks like, means some part of you has been picking up warning signals your conscious mind might have been dismissing as paranoia or overreaction. But those signals weren't wrong, weren't exaggerated, were actually your intuition correctly identifying that something about this person's fixation on you has unhealthy quality, compulsive quality, consuming quality that's intensifying rather than stabilizing, that's crossing boundaries rather than respecting them, that's entering realm where their inability to regulate their feelings about you is becoming your problem to manage, your safety to protect, your peace to defend against someone who's decided you're theirs to possess, even though you never agreed to be possessed. This isn't flattering attention that makes you feel desired, isn't healthy attraction that respects your autonomy and boundaries. This is fixation that objectifies you, that treats you as thing to be obtained rather than person to be known, that can't hear no or not interested or please back off because their obsession has reached point where your actual preferences matter less than their fantasy about you is less than has home. Zero hash is greater than, where reality of who you are gets replaced by projection of who they need you to be, where your resistance or rejection doesn't deter them but inflames them, makes them try harder, makes them escalate tactics, makes them more desperate and therefore more dangerous. Because desperate people do desperate things, and obsessed people who feel their object of obsession slipping away often become volatile in ways that weren't visible during earlier, more controlled phases of their fixation. And the shit is about to get real that frames this warning. That's indication that something is shifting, some escalation is occurring, some boundary is being crossed or about to be crossed that moves this from uncomfortable but manageable to genuinely concerning, that transforms their obsession from internal problem they're dealing with badly into external threat you need to take seriously. And the timing of this escalation might be tied to something specific, might be response to your recent boundary setting or your clear rejection or your involvement with someone else that triggered their possessive rage, might be them reaching breaking point where they can't maintain facade of normalcy anymore, where their obsession demands expression, demands action, demands they do something to relieve the pressure they're feeling, even though that something might violate you, might frighten you, might cross lines that can't be uncrossed once the crossing happens. In the particular danger of obsessive fixation that's escalating rather than resolving, you're dealing with someone whose internal state has become destabilized by feelings they can't control is less than has hone. Zero hash is greater than someone whose thoughts about you have become intrusive, consuming, resistant to rational intervention, someone who's likely creating narratives about your relationship that don't match reality, who's interpreting neutral interactions as signs of special connection, who's reading encouragement into responses that were actually polite refusals because they need to believe you want them or will want them or already love them but just don't know it yet. This level of delusion, this disconnect from reality, makes them unpredictable, makes normal social rules ineffective, makes direct communication potentially dangerous because they'll twist whatever you say to fit their narrative, will interpret your concern as care, your fear as passion, your rejection as obstacle to overcome rather than answer to accept. Let me illuminate what patterns might be intensifying that require your protective response. In the taxonomy of obsessive behavior that crosses into concerning territory, certain escalation patterns appear consistently. Monitoring intensifies beyond what they could plausibly explain as coincidence. They're not just aware of your public social media, they're tracking your movements, appearing in your spaces with frequency that can't be random, knowing details about your life they shouldn't know unless they're actively surveilling you, asking people about you, checking who you're with, where you're going, what you're doing, all while maintaining surface level plausible deniability that lets them claim they just happened to be there, just happened to see, just happened to hear, when the pattern reveals deliberate, systematic tracking. Your current reality likely includes exactly this kind of surveillance behavior. Someone who shows up at your regular spots too consistently, who comments on things you did or said that they shouldn't know about unless they're monitoring more closely than they're admitting, who knows your schedule better than a casual friend would know, who seems to have information about your private life that you didn't share with them directly. This monitoring might have started subtly, might have seemed like harmless interest initially, but it's intensified to point where you feel watched, where you can't do anything without wondering if they'll know about it, where your privacy has been eroded by their need to maintain constant awareness of your existence. Watch for escalation in contact attempts when you try to establish distance. If pulling back makes them contact you more, not less. If setting boundaries triggers increased pursuit rather than respectful retreat. If every attempt you make to create space gets interpreted as challenge they need to overcome rather than message they need to receive. This inverse response to boundaries is hallmark of obsession, distinguishes concerning fixation from healthy interest that respects your autonomy and backs off when you indicate you need space. Healthy attraction responds to boundaries by honoring them. Obsessive fixation responds to boundaries by fighting them, by finding ways around them, by escalating intensity to compensate for reduced access. Some obsessive escalation manifests through gift giving or grand gestures that feel more burdensome than romantic is less than #0. 5# is greater than. They're showering you with attention or presence or help you didn't request, creating sense of obligation through their excessive investment, making you feel guilty for not reciprocating their intensity, weaponizing their own feelings against you by making their emotional state your responsibility, by suggesting that if you don't respond positively, you're cruel or ungrateful or responsible for their suffering. These manipulative tactics, disguised as love or devotion, create pressure that's designed to wear down your resistance, to make rejecting them feel like violence you're committing against them rather than boundary you're maintaining for yourself. and the escalation happens when small gifts become large gestures, when occasional attention becomes constant bombardment, when they can't accept that their investment doesn't create your obligation. You might be experiencing exactly this kind of overwhelming attention disguised as affection. Someone who won't let you just be neutral about them, who demands response to every overture, who makes you feel guilty for not matching their intensity, who acts like your lukewarm or negative response is personal injury rather than natural reaction to unwanted pursuit. This emotional manipulation is tactic, conscious or unconscious, designed to bypass your boundaries through guilt rather than respecting that boundaries exist for good reason, that your lack of interest or your active disinterest is valid answer that deserves acceptance, not escalated attempts to change your mind. Still others escalate through possessive or controlling behavior is less than #0. 5 is greater than. They express jealousy about your other relationships, make comments about people you're spending time with, try to isolate you by criticizing your friends or family, attempt to control your choices by creating drama when you do things that don't include them, essentially acting like they have rights to you that you never granted, like you're theirs to manage even though you're not theirs. You're your own person with autonomy they're refusing to acknowledge because acknowledging your autonomy would mean accepting they can't have you, can't control you, can't make you be what they need you to be. This possessiveness often intensifies when they perceive threat, when you start dating someone else, when you seem happy in ways that don't include them, when your life is full without them in it, triggering rage or desperation that can become dangerous. This reflection invites you to consider: which obsessive patterns are you recognizing in someone's behavior toward you, and how long have these patterns been escalating? Let me clarify what you knew they were obsessed reveals about your prior awareness and why you didn't act sooner. You knew means this isn't new information, isn't surprise you're just discovering. You've been aware on some level that this person's interest in you crossed from normal into excessive, from healthy into compulsive. But awareness alone didn't translate into protective action, didn't trigger the boundary setting or distance creating or help seeking that the situation warranted. Possibly because you minimized the danger, possibly because you felt guilty about their feelings and didn't want to hurt them by rejecting them harshly, possibly because you worried you were overreacting and would look foolish if you treated their attention as threat when it was just obsessive interest. In the gap between knowing someone's obsessed and doing something about that knowledge, many people stay stuck for complex reasons. Socialized to be nice, to not make waves, to give people benefit of doubt, to not be mean by setting hard boundaries, to manage others' feelings at expense of their own comfort and safety, especially taught to women who get conditioned to accommodate men's attention, even when that attention feels wrong, feels invasive, feels threatening, because rejecting men's attention is framed as cruel, as overreaction, as something you should only do if you can prove clear and present danger, rather than trusting your gut that says something's wrong before that wrong escalates into undeniable harm. It's essential you recognize that you didn't cause their obsession by being too friendly, too nice, too anything. Obsessive people create their own obsessions out of minimal material, They latch on to anyone who shows them basic human kindness or attention and build entire fantasy relationships from interactions that were never meant to be building blocks for anything. And blaming yourself for their inability to regulate their feelings or respect your boundaries is exactly the trap that keeps you from protecting yourself effectively, that makes you prioritize their comfort over your safety, that makes you stay accessible to someone who should lose access to you entirely because their access has proven they can't be trusted with it. Some people knew about obsession but hoped it would fade if ignored, hoped that not feeding it with attention would make it die from lack of fuel. But obsession often intensifies when ignored, fills in gaps with fantasy, interprets your silence as playing hard to get, rather than genuine disinterest, is less than has hone. Zero hash is greater than uses your absence as blank canvas to project whatever they need to project to maintain their delusion that you're meant to be together, that you're just testing them. That persistence will eventually win you over because they've confused stalking with romantic pursuit, harassment with courtship, obsession with love. You might have been operating under exactly this hope that ignoring would resolve it, that they'd get the hint without you having to be explicit, that the problem would solve itself without you having to be mean or harsh or risk their reaction to clear rejection. But with obsessive people, hint taking doesn't work, subtlety doesn't register. Anything short of explicit no gets interpreted as maybe or not yet or convince me. And even explicit no sometimes gets heard as try harder by people who can't accept that their feelings aren't reciprocated, that their fantasy about you isn't your reality about them. This reflection invites you to consider what kept you from acting on your knowledge that they were obsessed, and what's changed now that makes action feel necessary. Let me address what "but this is scary" specifically indicates about the escalation that's occurring. Scary means the obsession has crossed threshold from uncomfortable to threatening, from annoying to alarming, from "I wish this person would leave me alone" to "I'm genuinely concerned about my safety or well being." And this shift from nuisance to threat usually happens because their behavior has escalated in ways that reveal they're not in control of themselves, not rational about you, not capable of accepting rejection or respecting boundaries. And when someone can't control themselves, when their feelings override their judgment, when their need for you trumps your explicit unwillingness, that's when situation becomes dangerous because you can't predict what they'll do, can't rely on normal social contracts to protect you, can't trust that they'll respect limits that emotionally stable people respect automatically. In the specific fear that escalating obsession creates, it's not always about explicit threats. Sometimes it's about implicit menace in their persistence, in their refusal to hear no, in their determination to have access to you regardless of your wishes, in their ability to show up in your life despite your attempts to create distance, in their knowledge of your patterns and locations that they shouldn't have unless they're actively tracking you. The fear is rational response to someone who's demonstrated they don't respect your autonomy, don't care about your comfort, won't accept your rejection. Because if they won't respect your no about contact, what else won't they respect your no about? And that uncertainty, that inability to know where their boundary violations will end, creates legitimate fear that shouldn't be dismissed as overreaction. It's critical you trust your fear as information rather than dismissing it as paranoia. Your nervous system is picking up cues that someone is dangerous, even if you can't articulate exactly why they feel dangerous. Your gut is screaming warnings that something is wrong. Even if surface interactions seem relatively normal, and research shows overwhelmingly that people who get harmed by obsessive pursuers almost always had gut feelings warning them, but they dismissed those feelings, talked themselves out of them, prioritized not wanting to seem dramatic over trusting their own threat assessment. Whew, your fear is data, not weakness, is protective instinct, not overreaction, is wisdom trying to keep you safe, not paranoia trying to make you irrational. Some scary escalation is verbal. They're making comments that reveal how much they think about you, how much space you occupy in their mind, how entitled they feel to you, saying things like, I can't stop thinking about you, or you're all I care about, or I'd do anything for you, or no one will ever love you like I do. Statements that might sound romantic in different context, but coming from someone whose obsession you're trying to escape, they sound like warnings, like possessive claims, um, like implicit threats about what might happen if you continue rejecting them or if you give your attention to someone else they see as competition. You might be hearing exactly these kinds of concerning statements. Declarations that feel more like ownership attempts than affection, comparisons that put them in competition with everyone else in your life, suggestions that they deserve you more than anyone else, implications that they won't accept you choosing someone else or choosing no one, all revealing that in their mind, you're not an autonomous person making free choices, but prize they're entitled to claim, object they're competing for, possession they're staking claim to, regardless of your actual desires or decisions about your own life. This reflection invites you to consider what specific behavior or statement or escalation has crossed the line from obsessed to scary for you. Let me speak to what you need to do immediately to protect yourself from this escalating situation. Document everything, save messages, screenshot posts, note dates and details of concerning interactions, record instances of them showing up in your spaces, keep log of boundary violations is less than #0. 5 hashes greater than. Because if this escalates to point where you need restraining order or police involvement, you'll need evidence of pattern, you'll need proof of persistent unwanted contact. And memory alone isn't sufficient. You need documentation that shows timeline, frequency, escalation, that demonstrates you've clearly communicated unwillingness to engage, that proves their pursuit is unwanted and persistent despite your explicit rejection. Tell people in your life what's happening. Don't keep this private out of embarrassment or hope it'll resolve itself. Inform friends, family, coworkers, anyone who's part of your regular life so they know not to give this person information about you, so they can watch for them in your spaces, so they can support you in maintaining boundaries. So you have witnesses if things escalate. So you're not handling this alone, which is exactly what obsessive people count on. Isolation, making their targets more vulnerable. Silence making their pursuit easier because no one's watching, no one's intervening, no one's holding them accountable. Create explicit boundaries if you haven't already. Send clear message, written if possible so there's record, stating explicitly that you don't want contact, don't want relationship, need them to stop all communication and all attempts to interact, because ambiguity is what obsessive people exploit. They take anything less than explicit no, never, stop completely as hope, as opening, as invitation to keep trying. And while explicit boundaries don't always work with obsessive people, they're necessary documentation that you clearly communicated unwillingness to engage, that their continued pursuit after clear rejection is harassment, not miscommunication. Vary your routines if possible. Don't be entirely predictable in your movements. Take different routes, go to different places, change patterns they've learned. Because part of how obsessive people maintain access is by learning your schedule, knowing where you'll be when, positioning themselves to accidentally encounter you. And disrupting that predictability makes it harder for them to track you, harder for them to create encounters, forces them to work harder, which might discourage them, or at least reduces frequency of uncomfortable interactions. Consider professional help. Talk to a therapist about how to handle this. Consult with domestic violence advocate, even if this isn't domestic situation, because they have expertise in obsessive pursuit and stalking behaviors. Contact police if behavior crosses into clear harassment or threats. Get restraining order if situation warrants it. Don't wait until something terrible happens to seek help. Don't minimize the danger because you don't want to seem dramatic. Trust that professionals would rather you seek help for a situation that turns out to be manageable than not seek help for a situation that becomes catastrophic because you waited too long. Trust your instincts. If situation feels dangerous, treat it as dangerous. If your gut says this person is capable of harm, believe that assessment, even if you can't prove it yet. If you feel afraid, let fear guide your protective actions rather than dismissing fear as overreaction. Because fear in situations like this is appropriate, is rational, is your nervous system correctly identifying threat that deserves your serious response? This reflection invites you to consider, what immediate protective actions will you take based on this warning about escalating obsession? Shit is about to get real. The situation is escalating from uncomfortable to potentially dangerous. You knew they were obsessed. You've been aware their interests cross normal boundaries. But this is scary. New behaviors or intensified patterns have crossed into genuinely alarming territory, demanding your protective response, demanding you take their obsession seriously as threat, not just as annoyance, demanding you prioritize your safety over their feelings, your boundaries over their desires, your peace over their persistence. And your work is immediate protection, documenting, telling people, setting explicit boundaries, varying routines, seeking help, trusting your fear, doing everything necessary to create distance and safety between yourself and someone whose inability to regulate their feelings about you has become your safety concern. Someone whose obsession isn't flattering or romantic, but invasive and threatening. Someone whose persistence isn't dedication, but harassment. Someone who needs professional help you can't provide and shouldn't try to provide, because trying to help them keeps you accessible when you need to be completely inaccessible. May you trust your fear as wisdom. May you protect yourself without guilt. May you create distance without apology. May you remember their obsession is their problem, your safety is your priority. The escalation is real, the danger is present, your protection is necessary. Act now, not later. Remember this: obsessive people don't stop because you're nice to them, don't respect boundaries because you're gentle about setting them, don't accept rejection because you're kind about delivering it. They stop when consequences make continuing impossible, when access is completely cut off, when their pursuit meets consistent refusal backed by support systems and sometimes legal intervention. And protecting yourself from an obsessive person requires you to be willing to seem mean, willing to be explicitly harsh, willing to involve authorities if necessary, willing to prioritize your safety over their feelings or their mental health or their claim that they just love you so much, because love doesn't violate, doesn't threaten, doesn't refuse to hear no, doesn't make the beloved feel afraid. And what they're doing isn't love, it's obsession. And obsession that's escalating into scary territory demands your serious protective response starting right now. Take this seriously. Protect yourself immediately. Their obsession is not your responsibility. Your safety is your only priority.